We don't really understand how paracetamol works.
Really? Surely that's not true.
Completely true. We do look for mechanisms of actions, but everybody knows that it works, but we don't understand why.
It's blown my mind. Hello and welcome to Leading Beyond the Lab. Today I had the pleasure of being joined by Muhannad Alomari and Dr. Nik Sharma, the co-founders of BioCortex. What is it that you and the BioCortex teams think will improve things so significantly?
Yeah, no, great question. So we start by saying, look, we are a weird company. At BioCortex, our core thesis is that there are bacteria within tumours. This has been known about for over 100 years, but they've been ignored. And fundamentally, what we think is that because they vary geographically, those bacteria are different, and we think that that explains a significant amount of the variance that we see in clinical trials. We think we're the only people who see this. We think we can unlock a huge amount of value there.
With your platform, how do you actually prove that it's making an impact or a change?
Good question. Our technology, I wouldn't call it an AI. It's more inspired by how we do things in aerospace. It's tried and tested technologies, and it's what get us, back in the 60s to the moon. It's that same technology, but applied in biology.
In addition to that, there was one moment where we were able to reproduce work that took the lab something like 18 months to do in about 4 minutes.
Wow.
We could do it in seconds now.
Wow.
We can just move at a much faster pace.
So if we don't get this right as a civilization, if we don't get the problem that BioCortex is set up to solve right, what are the potential downsides? What will this mean?
Oh yeah, look, one of the key things, and again, we touched upon it briefly, is...
Did you know that 97% of our listeners are not subscribed to the Leading Beyond the Lab podcast channel? Be sure to hit subscribe to make sure that new episodes with the guests and companies that we're talking to land straight into your feed. Thank you. Hello and welcome to Leading Beyond the Lab. Today I had the pleasure of being joined by Muhannad Alomari and Dr. Nik Sharma, the co-founders of BioCortex. Nik is a trained neurologist who spent years treating ALS patients and saw firsthand what slow, uncertain drug development can really mean for the patients who just don't have the time. Mo is the former head of AI at a Rolls-Royce company, R2 Data Lab, where he led advanced simulation work in aerospace, an industry which is renowned for stress testing and emulating systems way before real-world deployment. At BioCortex, they're bringing these two worlds together. Fascinatingly, their platform, Carbon Mirror, runs in silico bridge trials where they predict how effective oncology drugs will be on certain populations. They do this to tackle one critical question: ultimately, will the drug work? To get things started, I'd be really interested in getting your perspective in your own words. So over the past 5 years, drug failure rates have not improved. And what is it that you believe, that you and the BioCortex teams think that will improve things so significantly?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think... Obviously, drug discovery and drug development, it has a success rate of around 4%. It's a very long iteration cycle. I think we're seeing a huge amount of development in China and other areas that are able to increase that. At BioCortex, our core thesis is that there are bacteria within tumours. This has been known about for a really long time. It's about over 100 years. That if you look down a microscope, you can see little bacteria within tumours. But they've been ignored. And fundamentally, what we think is that there's an element, because they vary geographically. So if you live in Shanghai versus New York versus London, those bacteria are different. And we think that that explains a significant amount of the variance that we see in clinical trials. So we think we're the only people who see this, and we think we can unlock a huge amount of value there.
And how does technology and AI loop in there?
So I can say we are fundamentally very different in this space. So if you look at the backstory to how BioCortex came to be, one of the things that Nik and we've been working together for many years, and one of the things we've been debating is the differences between, say, drug development and other verticals that compare or as a parallel can be seen as a parallel to drug development. And if you look at the development of a single airplane engine, it actually nicely compares as a parallel to drug development. An engine development costs a couple of billions, takes more than a decade to build, and has loads of smart people working on it. Key difference being is that most engines work, most drugs don't. And one of the reasons...
You'd hope so too if you're flying.
Yes, indeed. Yes. One of the reasons we feel is obviously attributing or contributing to this high success rate in this really complex thing is the availability of what we call computer-aided design tools to engineers, and that are not available in pharma. And these tools are not AI, are not machine learning. They are physics-based. They are far from perfect. In fact, there's a running joke in Rolls-Royce back in when I was working there, is that the quickest way to get a wrong answer is to use one of these models. However, engineers still know how to use them and utilize them to navigate the near infinite search space that they have to operate within to identify the pockets where the correct solution lies. And if you mirror that back into pharma, there are key decisions that has to be made in this, again, near infinite space. And if you make them right, you can succeed. And so our technology is not I wouldn't call it an AI. It's more inspired by how we do things in aerospace. It's tried and tested technologies, and it's what get us, back in the 60s to the moon. It's that same technology, but applied in biology.
And I think the key thing is that we're not looking at something that is new. This isn't like CRISPR or iPSCs or single cell. This is fundamentally, we have co-evolved with bacteria. If we look inside our cells, we all have little mitochondria. Mitochondria are ex-bacteria. They're probably ex-McKinsey as well, in the sense they're everywhere. But they are, they are...
I haven't heard that before. That's a good one.
Yeah, it's going to get me to trouble.
Yeah.
Sure, it really is going to get me a letter. But the point is that they're everywhere. And most of the proteins that they produce are actually still bacterial in origin. So, when Mo and I were shooting this out many years ago, the question was that we think there's this is the space that is going to contain a huge amount of value and a huge amount of solution to people living with diseases. The problem is it is a near infinite search space. And so that was why, that was one of the reasons why this approach, I think, works.
And if you were going to simplify all of that into a really clear mission and objective goal for BioCortex, what is that?
Yeah, what we want an individual to know that they can respond to a drug. It's as simple as that. If you look at what happens at the moment, whether it's even in clinical practice or in a trial, at the individual level, if somebody gets a bad diagnosis, they can spend 6 months, a year trying medications that aren't going to work. Imagine if you could have a situation where actually that's going to work, and or better still, that isn't going to work, but actually if you take BioCortex flavor A or flavor B, it will work. And that, for the individual living with the disease plus their family, I think will be transformative.
And why did you pick oncology?
Yeah, oncology, I have lots of friends who are oncologists, but no. The
Do you argue as a neurologist?
As a neurologist, there's, obviously the brain's the best organ, but the point about oncology, and this is sort of serious, is that from a data point of view, it's actually, the data is much more available, but also from a scientific point of view, it's a much simpler system. The challenge about going after the brain at the first initial outset is that commercially, it's a real challenging area. Trials in neurodegenerative disease, are very, very challenging. Whereas oncology, there's a huge focus on oncology, and it's already implicitly built into clinical trials. So when we work with biotech companies in China or in the US, they're already taking tumor biopsies, and that's the key bit of data that we need. So it doesn't require any modification.
And how do you, with your platform, with your carbon mirror platform, how do you actually prove that it's making an impact or a change?
Yeah, great question.
Absolutely, yeah. Just to say, again, it's important to elaborate on what the technologies are. So we have two core pieces of technology. There is a vast knowledge graph that acts as our truth, our knowledge management system that currently houses about 70 billion different nodes and relations within it, all of which are mechanistic. So none of it is mined off the literature. And that we call carbon knowledge. And it's the foundation that the second piece of technology, which is the biology emulator, Carbon Mirror, builds on top. And to answer the question first, is perhaps worth elaborating on the difference between simulation and emulation. So you see, in simulation, to answer your questions about how do you validate a simulation, simulations are interested in mapping out an input to an output without actually trying to understand the true nature of what it is they are mimicking. So all they care about is, as a model, is if I give you a set of inputs, can you tell me some outputs? And that obviously requires validation in a different way because you're not mimicking what actually is that you are simulating. In emulation, however, which is really important in engineering, you're trying to build a computational model that truly reflect what happens at a mechanistic level of the things you are emulating. And the validation to that is obviously has a different approach to it. And so I would say we have a retrospective and a prospective sort of different arms of how we validate it. But retrospectively, it should be taken with a different weighing to it, because we don't suffer from what traditional machine learning systems suffer from, which is when you are validating retrospectively, there is always a concern that your test set has leaked into your training set. And obviously it's a valid concern if you're doing that. Yeah, because that is like your biggest worry. Have you trained on something that you are like testing the system on? And if so, your whole validation is just invalid, right? Or your whole test set is invalid. We don't have that because we don't have training in our emulation. We are building a mechanistic model of human biology. And therefore, when we retrospectively assess it, it's hypothesis driven. Like, it's all starts from the science, and then it translates into our computational model and gives us an answer, and then we retrospectively evaluate that. But we understand that's not sufficient. So we prospectively look at, say, for example, ongoing clinical trials today, and see how can we predict before the outcomes of these trials come based on our technology.
Yeah, we've done we've done prospective preclinical trials. Preclinical models. We've run our own phase 1 like studies in humans to prove interactions.
What sponsored your own studies to do it?
Yeah. So we've done that. So we know the engines work. The challenge always is, as Mo says, this is about building trust.
Yeah.
And you're completely right. As in, how do we prospectively do that? Now we are tracking all of large pharma's pipelines, which is fun, because what we can do is we can say, well, okay, for this study, and there have been numerous publicly listed companies that we've been able to determine the outcome before they were published. Now the challenge is how do we timestamp that? We've spoken to some of the hedge fund managers.
So you've correctly projected the outcome, and you have tracked that.
Absolutely.
How you've done that.
Absolutely.
And the thing published it or something. So
this is the challenge.
Backs up your future proof. Oh, that's really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. The challenge is how you do that without causing offence. Essentially, you're not going
to work with them.
You're not going to win friends by doing that a day before the trial's about to publish. So we are trying to do that across the pharma aspects. The other. Well, do you want to?
No, this was more of a comment on your question about, like, are you able to predict? I guess that's really not the question, because we all know that 96%-ish of all like drug development fails, right?
Yeah.
And therefore, if you create a system that just says it's gonna fail, you're sort of guaranteed 96% success rate. Like, you're 96% of the times correctly saying what's going to happen, right? So the point isn't to just predict with a high accuracy what's going to happen. We know most of the times things fail. It's, are you able to explain the logic that fundamentally you built your assumption on?
Yeah.
And is that a valid thing? And this is, again, where we differ from like traditional AI.
And one thing that stands out about your company is that you don't sit into the classical archetypes or filters or buckets when it comes to tech bio or AI platform biotechs and things like that. So how have you found that when you're talking about your value proposition to companies, clients, investors, how have you found that discussion?
Yeah, I think the discussion. I mean, we start by saying, look, we are a weird company. Yeah, that gets it over and done with. Everybody feels more comfortable,
rip the band-aid,
relaxed. Is just
honestly
they
helps,
feel. They feel better. We also say, look, we're not an AI company, so we're not going to fundamentally get down to a trust my black box versus trusting somebody else's black box. And because we're dealing with mechanisms, we build trust by showing them are working out. So ultimately, when we're working with the companies, we actually show them precisely why we think something's going on. And also, to Mo's point about it's not a matter of predicting whether they're going to fail or succeed. What we're trying to do is trying to chart a path for them. So we often try to put it into the analogy, trying to get your kid into Harvard. Yeah, if your child wants to go to Harvard, right? It's about a 4% success rate. Okay. We're not saying that we can get that up to a 99%
of everyone that applies.
Yeah. So the point is, what's the value of going from 4% to 8% to 20%? That's a lot of value. And people will. That unlocks a large amount of value. So we're not saying this is going to suddenly, we're not saying it's going to be 99%, but we're saying from a probability point of view, we can shift that from 4%. Maybe we can double it. Maybe we can do a lot more than that.
And because this doesn't fit into one of those standard buckets, can you just talk me through in simple terms how you complement an existing translational function or traditional drug development function, and where you feed in? Because is it more towards the cost collapse, or is it more towards the improvement of the quality of the service, or is it a bit of both?
Yeah, no, great question. So our ideal sort of customer in this particular situation, we are looking at assets that are being developed in one region and moved to another region. So typically at the moment, that's assets coming out of China, South Korea, or Australia, perhaps. We're looking to move those assets from China to global. We're really looking at the companies that are actually, who have got that early clinical data, so phase 1B, 2A.
Yeah.
And they're looking to out-license, they're looking to work out where to run their studies at that point. So we're not early on in the drug discovery process. You know, we can technically work in preclinical, and we have done. It isn't really where we unlock the most value. And certainly later on.
Why is that, sorry?
Because pharma's very, very large, and ultimately the preclinical teams work with their preclinical. They're not necessarily looking to the next stage to say what's going to happen in phase 1 or in phase 2.
So it's the proximity and closeness to phase 1, which makes your...
It's the proximity to the pain.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, ultimately, if we're working with a company who, you know, the CEO or the chairman or the team have had, you know, getting back to that child getting into Harvard, right? If they've got one child and they're convinced their child's going to get into Harvard, right? There's no, you know, they don't need us, yeah? If it's like their third or fourth child, they've had ones who they thought were great, they haven't got in.
Yeah.
They're looking for any angle. Yeah, and that's where we actually really unlock the value.
Sorry, Artie.
No, obviously the clinical sense, Nik is the one to answer that. But from a technology point of view, emulators has many things you can utilize them for. One of which is scenario modeling, and for scenario modeling, the right, you know, people ask, you know, they say, I want to, for example, elections or whatever, you want to play a different scenarios and see how can I win. That's actually the wrong question. The right question to an emulator is, if you have $1 to spend, where should I spend it to maximize my chances of winning whatever it is that I'm after, right? And in the clinical setup, often what everyone else out there is either trying to do is either giving a black box to try and assess whether you're going to succeed or not. And again, I feel that is the wrong question. That's really not the question. The question where we complement all of these existing technologies out there is we can help key decision makers do the right investments at the right time so they can maximize their probability of success of whatever it is their key objective is for that stage.
So if we look at some of the partnerships that we've announced, there's one particular Chinese biotech company that we've announced, CD Biopharma. You know, if you look at where we add value, to Mo's point, you know, we don't just say, hey, it's not going to work. It's not going to, that's not what we do. If you look at the different tumors, we can help optimize the strategy to go into the right tumor first. So it increases your probability of success rather than going for something that's just purely commercially driven, for example, say non-small cell lung cancer. So we can help them choose there and understand the entire risk of their portfolio. And we can also help then maximize them to say, well, okay, if you run that in the US or in these particular states in the US, this is your chances versus historical outcomes versus Europe versus other trial protocols.
Okay, I see what you're saying. So, and when you combine the two of your profiles and backgrounds, I'd love to hear in your words how that complements each other. Like a marriage, I suppose.
You're going to get us in trouble here.
Yeah, so I think the overlap, when you look at it fundamentally, I mean, Mo and I think one of the great joys of working with Mo and working with the team is that our overlaps actually really comes down to data. I would say data, appreciation of maths, and just the right
Where did you meet?
view. We met at a dinner a long time ago.
In a random dinner on the back of an AI for Good initiative that basically happened at Rolls-Royce. Something to do, obviously, with helping people with speech impediment, developing language model before LLMs were cool. And as a way to honor that like small initiative to help people living with this condition, one of the charities set up a dinner where I, being similar to Nik, not really very social, sat at the very end of all the tables, and Nik was sat there.
Never guess.
We were literally at the back, and it was just I really didn't want to go. I'll be very honest.
You went for the cause.
I was just why am I going to this? But yeah, it worked out, which is great.
Yeah, when you got chatting and then the idea.
Yeah, sort of got chatting. Then we ended up having joint PhD students, joint grants, etc. And then, you know, we were shooting something out, and, you know, again, coming back to that point about search
space. So what was the brainchild of the idea then? What was the spark?
So I think I'd been working with bacteria in the microbiome for a while. And then the challenge that we had was that, this is the search space, right? It's infinite. But in this lies a huge amount of value, and we can cure diseases. But it's a maths problem because it's not a wet lab problem because there are too many bacteria to ever grow. You can't do this sequentially. So you needed a completely different approach. So I was shooting this out with Mo, saying, hey, near infinite search space, massive value. Any thoughts?
Yeah, and then he went, you can apply these systems and
well, sort of alloy design. I mean, whoever knew about alloys, yeah?
So mate, I never thought about how similar they were until you just explained it though. When it comes to, obviously the complexities, they're both incredibly complex and high risk. People can drive up the sky versus people incurable diseases.
Yeah.
So the pressures are also similar as well as the complexities.
Mission critical, definitely.
Yeah,
And both
that's
applications are so mission critical that there really is no wiggling room for any error. Like you have to do all you can do to prevent a mistake. And that is the truth. Like that's the nature in aerospace and civil nuclear where we have worked in the past. And again, in clinical terms, it's exactly the same. And operating under uncertainty, I would say.
Yeah.
Both of us, engineers and clinicians, are very comfortable with the fact that we don't have all the data. In fact, that's the norm. As in, if you have all the data, that would be too suspicious. Like that's wrong.
Exactly. And you can't, and the thing is we're not working within, we're not looking at drugs that are very well known. This isn't a repurposing drug play where you could, there may be data out there. So we're working with really novel assets. So you can't approach it from an AI machine learning point of view because there's no training data set. So if you look at the way that SpaceX did their self-landing rocket on the 9th attempt, if you would approach that from an AI perspective purely, you'd launch 1,000 rockets, try and train on the data. Nobody's ever going to do that, right? So you've actually got to build that emulator in silico, fail as much as you can, learn from each particular real-world experiment you do, get slightly closer to the truth to increase your probability of success.
Fascinating. What stands out is using real-life examples like SpaceX, because what they did was truly disrupt, didn't they?
Yeah, completely. And NASA said that was no way you can be able to do that.
On the 9th attempt.
On the 9th attempt, exactly. Not even 10.
Is that it? How long did that take to get from start to finish?
So this is the beauty about emulators. Again, if you're building something that truly reflects physics, then you could very cost effectively and cheaply run like millions of situations. And in fact, I should say, SpaceX, which NASA does as well, is they run crash tests. You actually run things which will fail, and you want them to fail, because if they fail, it means your emulator is correct, like at predicting that. And that gets you closer to the right answer.
I think one of the challenges and some of the pushback that we get is that this is all great, but we don't know all of the biology. We don't understand it in the same way that we do from an engineering perspective. And I think what's lost there is that this isn't about us having a perfect system. And again, it gets back to Mo's point about operating with uncertainty. It's not about having a perfect system. It's about, do we have enough information now to unlock value? And ultimately, if you look at, say, two analogies is one is if you look at an ant colony, you don't need to understand every single movement of the ant. Or if you look at the human brain, I don't need to understand every single neuron firing perfectly to know what Mo's going to order when we're flying out of Boston, right? I know precisely. I know precisely when he's going to order. Is that a burger or it's the seafood place, right? It's and I know which one it'll be, because it's the emergent behavior. Part to it. So it's a very different mentality to saying I must unlock everything. And if you look at medicine, we don't really understand how paracetamol works.
Really?
We don't really understand how paracetamol works.
It's wild, isn't it?
Surely that's not true.
Completely true, right? It's we don't really understand it. So we do look for mechanisms of actions, etc., but everybody knows that it works, right?
Yeah.
But we don't understand why. But it doesn't matter that we don't necessarily understand why.
Yeah. Because doesn't it? But I suppose you just blow my mind with that. So isn't it like pain relief and increases blood flow?
No. It's actually, paracetamol is a really special drug, but it's true for a number of drugs, and we are all about mechanisms of action. Yeah. To be clear, and the mechanisms of action are really what we're focused on. But it's coming back to the idea of, you don't need perfection. You don't need to understand everything 100%. Mo keeps telling me that they don't fully understand how jet engines work.
Goodness, that's
Which
terrifying.
is that?
So
would
to
you say that's
clarify,
fair?
the physics of,
You're gonna be
of
served.
aerospace. No, but it's actually true. So the physics at supersonic speed is little understood. Like we don't, I mean, fundamentally, we don't have a model that explains the physics of the world. And obviously engines operate within this world. And therefore we don't understand that whole thing. We have excellent models that approximate. We have lots of data to back this up. But ultimately, as Nik said, like engineers and clinicians alike are comfortable with the uncertainty. Once you have shown and demonstrated that this is sufficient to be safe and it should be used, then that's
Exactly.
fine.
So if we don't get this right as a people, as a civilization in the industry, as i.e. we don't get the problem that BioCortex is set up to solve right, what are the potential downsides? What will this mean?
Well, if you look at Irum's law, so Moore's law backwards, so obviously that's computer chips, etc., power, everything going down. Irum's law is the cost of drug development. So at the moment, last thing was around 2.4 billion. That's going up, so it doubles essentially. There was a paper out last year which I think estimated between 6 and 11 billion per asset into clinic. So that cost is increasing. So that failure means that the amount of drugs coming into clinic are actually being reduced. People are
the investment's going up, right?
Yeah, investment's going up. The cost is going up.
More people employed by it. Yeah,
and people aren't. People are living with diseases that are potentially curable, essentially. And so, by actually changing that, by driving that cost down, because just even shifting that 4% even to 8% will have a dramatic effect. That will end up democratizing sort of medications across different regions as well. So when we look at regional differences, it will make drug development much cheaper, hopefully. And ultimately that will unlock all of the AI drug discovery companies as well, because they will then be able to develop and push those further forward as well.
Well, I mean, I guess to like the what would we lose? Time, right? That's all we have. As in, we have. There are many people today that are curable, as Nik puts it, but we don't, because we're not doing the right thing. There is, and this is something that we fundamentally believe in. We believe emulators are the way forward for like understanding human biology and therefore health and disease. And the reason why I'm so confident with this, because this methodology, this philosophy, this like framework of how to approach a very complex task, we have successfully deployed this and put a man on the moon back in the 60s with tech that is below like what is in that iPad there. And if we can do that by following this philosophy, it sounds like baffling to me that we're not trying that same exact approach on really complex system that we know we can't solve them like by other methods.
So what then are the limits of the model?
Oh yeah, the limits of the model. Look, we don't we don't drink our own Kool-Aid. We are not like saying this is perfection, and we are one of the key things. And again, we touched upon it briefly about what makes us different when we're talking to companies. Is we will categorically say, look, we can't look at this. We don't have the appropriate pathways. We don't have the appropriate knowledge yet, and we can say, look, we can. This isn't where our strength lies. But this is where we think we can add value. And so we've got complete transparency. So when we work with companies, they're the domain experts on their particular asset. Mm-hmm. So we will present, say, 10 pathways and say, this is what we think is involved. They will happily turn around and say, well, look, we don't like those 3 just because we don't, but we've got these additional 5. Because carbon knowledge, carbon mirror is all mechanistic, we can just add in those pathways. So we have a very open discussion about what we can't do.
So do you think the future would make it possible that BioCortex could prevent a phase 3 failure?
I think in an ideal situation, I think it would be increase the probability of success of a phase 3 success.
And if you look at 93% as the current level, which doesn't sound overly optimistic, where would your gut / instinct / romantic hope say that you should be at as a civilization in the...
Yeah, we often get that question. Yeah, I think it's
what's realistic is probably better.
To use one of Mo's things is I think it's the slightly wrong question. Yeah, because it's a bit like it's not all assets should work, right? The mechanisms, not all drugs should work.
To innovate, you've got to get things wrong, like you said earlier.
Yeah. So the point is that there's only so much carbon mirror will be able to improve something. What we should be able to do, hopefully, is be able to get to the point where we can shift that needle in the right drug with the right mechanism in the right tumor type, the effect can be quite large. We published some work at ASCO where we looked at this effect size to see how much it could shift it. Now, it was a similar effect size to smoking. So when you look at actually what happened with survival, it was a similar effect size to smoking. So it was significant. But again, it's going to vary depending on tumor, depending on geography. I don't think there's a pan answer where it's like, this is the percentage that's being explained. The key thing is you want to know where the potholes are. You want to know where the storms are when you're sailing across a place. It's trying to work out, can you get through or not?
And do you target any particular geography because you feel like you can add the most value there quicker?
Yeah, I think certainly, working with companies in China, South Korea, Japan, who have got that early clinical data, who are looking to out-license and partner. We've announced that partnership with CD Biopharm. We've got another 2 or 3 in line.
Congrats.
The innovation that is going on in China, we spend a lot of time in Shanghai and Beijing, and we were with the Chinese ambassador to the UK on Friday for the New Year celebration. The rate of innovation is phenomenal, but the ability to be able to carry trials out very quickly is a massive cost saving. So everybody's looking to China, really.
Yeah, and why wouldn't the European and American companies be as front-footed at also approaching things like that?
Oh no, absolutely. And just to be clear, there's very clever people working everywhere on this. I think it's really not about the US companies or the European companies, not doing as well. I think it's really, if you look at structural aspects. So, we were at ASCO last year, had a number of posters. 3 back-to-back presentations were done from this single hospital in China in the Greater Bay Area, so just slightly north of Hong Kong. We looked them up because they were amazing studies. They had 2,200 oncology beds. There is not a hospital in the UK, or as far as we're aware in America, that has that level of oncology beds. And it wasn't necessarily a tier 1 hospital in China.
Wow.
So just the ability to be able to recruit patients that fast, that's a structural difference. That's a stepwise change.
It's almost cultural. How do
It's amazing, as in it's truly, truly amazing. So we visited a hospital as part of a trip with HSBC and AstraZeneca, and they were moving into their second phase of a hospital, which was 4,000 bedded hospital.
Be interesting to know what their lead times to an appointment is by comparison to the rest of the world.
Yeah, I don't know that.
Yeah,
I must admit.
I can bet it's better.
Yeah. But American companies have always been very big on innovation.
Absolutely, yeah.
And dynamic. So is that part of the growth strategy?
Oh, completely. And if you look at the innovation that is occurring in America, it is absolutely phenomenal. There's the NewCo model as well, where assets are coming in from China and they're being built within the US ecosystem as well. And so I think there's a number of different models that actually work. Because ultimately everybody's in it to help people living with diseases. And I think that's, whether it's China, whether it's the US, whether it's Europe, I think everybody's got that common aim. And there's some really clever people working on this. And I think it's really us or for BioCortex to help those really clever people just succeed.
And when you combine your 2 talents and experiences, what's coming in. So when to solve problems effectively, where do you get the natural friction?
What time to turn up to the airport?
What are you and what
There's
are
a
you?
long-standing debate.
Are you a 90-minute?
Somebody has a problem at China.
I do have a problem. I should seek interventions about this. I do. I insist on getting everywhere early. It's just a long.
How early is an airport?
Well, it has benefited us, just to say before, so I shouldn't be too critical of this, but yeah, more than 3 hours.
Well, no, we're generally there. I would say
without luggage over.
Well,
yeah, but we look, just to be clear, we turn right and sit next to the toilet. So we are not turning left on the plane. We are like in the toilet or next to the toilet. So we are, it's important to get those headphones on, the hoodie up, and to sleep.
To give Nik credit on this, which again, it is a problem, but it has benefits, is when we show up early to meetings, etc., the benefit you gain from just being there early is like amazing.
Yeah, especially certain cultures as well.
Yeah.
But on a serious note, when you're trying to tackle problems, obviously I see massive advantages from the 2 different mindsets and training and the cultural journey that you go on towards those problem solving like targets and processes. There's massive highs. Have you got some good examples of where you double team to approach things?
I think we double team on virtually everything.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of something that we wouldn't double team on. I think.
What does it offer though? As in, you might come at it from more scientific or clinician.
I think that's where that shared approach to data, to solving the problem, etc., is really where. I mean, one of the things that's really interesting is that Mo and I really don't have a gap when we're talking about things. It's really unusual, and we didn't realize, I think, at first, how unusual it was. And I think one of the things that we've recognized is that when we then, translate a solution to the team, is just maintaining that sort of closeness, that there isn't a gap. And the gap can be as simple as lexicon. It can be as simple as use of language about what is science ready, what is tech ready, etc., and sort of closing it. But what we realized was that we didn't spot it because we don't seem to have a gap on there. It's probably because we spend a lot of time together waiting at airport gates, talking about stuff.
Yes,
I would say.
No, I would agree actually. Yeah, I mean, I would describe it more as complementary as opposed to just different, because different could be different. And
I see what you're saying. Yeah, there's a massive middle ground.
Yeah,
and that probably is a rarity to have two people from different backgrounds who really think about things the same way.
Yeah, I think it helps that I think I code, but I don't code anymore at BioCortex, which I think really helps, because I think that would be a disaster.
That is true. Everyone in the team code, clinician scientist, everyone in the team, I would say probably can name about 50 proteins like by heart, obviously including engineers, physicists, etc. And it's that shared, which is to your point, like it's not just complementary, it's also everyone is really genuinely taking an interest and putting the effort to learn about the other.
And I think also having what it requires though, and what I think one of the key secrets is transparency, which is hugely important to us.
Radical honesty.
Yeah, as in,
I agree with that.
And it's saying that you don't know. Yeah. Because it's one of the challenges with a multidisciplinary team or teams with very different backgrounds is that everybody just sits and nods, right? It's like, I have no idea what he's talking about, right? Or I don't know what that is. If somebody just says, actually, look, what are you talking about, right? I have no idea what you said in the last sentence.
Yeah.
Then it allows everybody to move further forward faster. So it puts pressure on the team to say, well, okay, I should be using language that everybody else understands, but also it puts pressure on the other side to say, actually, I've got to call you out on it.
Yeah, I suppose if they can't explain it in simple terms to you, then they won't be able to do it to, say, for example, an investor or something like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, or someone that's potentially using the product. And with what really stands out is the kind of growth mindset thinking, blue ocean thinking. I suppose if you're operating in a space where you are a disruptor, it's important to go into things knowing you're not going to know anything. And even if you take it back to your case studies around SpaceX and everything else, there's definitely a thing there, isn't there, around being willing to fail, before, in silico, before it gets to a patient, for example, which is just super impressive, really. And I suppose you probably think back to when you were a clinician practicing in neurology and think, oh, I wish I knew some of this, I wish I had some of the mechanisms and things available to me that I will have in a few years.
I don't. I must admit I don't.
Yeah.
But
Why?
I think it's, so look, I still see people living with diseases. And I think to me, that's really important to stay grounded, because there is nobody who wants to move as fast as somebody who's living with disease.
Yeah.
And I think it also keeps us as a company grounded, because it's very different, particularly say in, there are phenomenal events where everybody gets really excited and there's a lot of backslapping, etc. And it's all, this model's done X, this model's done Y. But when you're faced with somebody who's living with a disease, it's, their question is often, okay, so what does this mean for me? As in, so when there's a new model that is a foundational model for X, I'm not picking on any particular company where it's like, we've achieved 0.35 versus 0.31. It's like, what does that translate to?
Yeah.
And I think that's what keeps us focused on actually unlocking the value, but also trying to move at the same pace, or as quick as we can, but also not waiting for perfection, not waiting for all the data. You've got to make the decision when you make the decision.
So with all of that in mind, how does that translate into the people that you hire and when you grow, and the products that you use and your tech stack and everything else about the business?
I think one of the things that we really look for, and if you look at the team, the bit that I will blush at, and I always blush out speaking to investors or speaking to customers is the team.
Yeah.
As in, the team is absolutely everything, and BioCortex doesn't exist without the team. They're phenomenal. They work. To say they work hard doesn't do them justice. As in, they work through challenging times. We've never been a company. We are a weird company, so we're not. We're not. We're a company that's had challenging times, and the team have always absolutely delivered. I think what we look for is that first principle thinking. I think we tend to attract people who don't fit in other places, I think, which is similar to us, I would guess.
Like in the nicest of way, they're weird, and that is almost by design. Like we want them to be thinking differently to like what everyone else is doing, because what we are attempting in here doesn't actually mirror anyone else out there, and so therefore the way we measure, the way we assess, I have lots of issues with KPIs, but like the way we evaluate things are very, very different from anyone else's background. And so we look for people who stand out in that, like they're not compliant with a lot of the...
There's a clear sort of rebellious streak in a lot of them.
You can feel that, actually.
I would say. I would say that, we often, the feedback that we often get from speaking to members of the team and people who we're, thinking about in the team is they've often been through, they've been through different areas where they've gained skills. And the feedback they've had is, well, you don't fit here, you don't fit there. And that to us that's absolutely why you fit with us.
It sounds a bit like, you hear a lot of high performing companies that have disrupted recently, like Palantir. I remember listening to a podcast from their founder and CEO, and he was saying exactly the same things, really, that he looks for people that don't fit in.
Yeah.
Because sometimes they're the brightest people in the room.
Completely.
They can make the biggest change. They just don't know how to communicate it, or if anything, you just need to ask them more questions and sit down with them.
Absolutely.
You've got to protect those people.
And then on that note, when you're hiring, obviously, typically what you would have is you'd have a skill set, because you've mentioned skill set. You have a skill set and you build a matrix and see like who complies best with that. That really doesn't work. As in, honestly, you have to go with your gut. Like you have to meet them, talk to them, and then there's almost like a sixth sense. You just know, okay, this person is going to do well in BioCortex. You should come. It's
like they always have the raw materials and the chemistry there.
Yeah, and I think it's one of the other challenges is that if somebody's always been within one lane, we're not a company where it's like you come along, we've got a set, here's your job description, you're going to operate within this very narrow boundaries, and we don't want you looking outside. It's almost the complete opposite. It's like, please don't stay within your lane. We're going to need all these other things. And also, we have an OBS sort of rule in the company. So if
no BS,
as in
is it OBS?
Sort of no bullshit.
No bullshit.
So if they see something where it's they've got the experience, or they say, look, guys, what are you doing? Right, this is nuts. Just do this.
To give Nik credit, this actually is stated in our culture deck, which Nik added on the day one. Is like, we have a no bullshit rule in the company, and it's like really everyone abides by it.
And people do that ability to be able to call out. And I've been just to say, I've been called out numerous times by the team. And it's, we're obviously very sensible, and it's very done in a, feedback's really important to us, and it's done in a
feedback's a gift.
It has to be quick, and it has to be done in a, it doesn't always have to be accepted. The person doesn't always have to agree, but it has to be sort of rapid. But it goes all directions. And so we've had one particular team member turned around and said, I won't go into the actual name of the CEO, but it was one of the large social media companies. They said, well, look, even insert name wouldn't come out with that comment, Nik. And I was like, shit, right? I've really gone down a rabbit hole. So I was like, okay, fine. Yeah, just sorry. Let's move back to the piece.
It's very much similar to when we work on searches with large pharma versus early stage companies. There's pros and cons to both. But in certain environments, certain types thrive. I suppose you have to almost read between the lines sometimes.
Yeah, and I think we are becoming more, not formalized, but we've had a really good last quarter from our commercial side of things. This quarter's looking amazing.
Congrats.
Where that we are.
What was the? There's usually like a kind of inflection point. I know there's usually a few, but where's the big one that comes to mind for the two of you, where things have started to?
Yeah, I think we, we brought on board Daniel Stent, who's our head of commercial, who's been absolutely transformative. Again, phenomenal background, as in just absolutely amazing background. Knows a lot about guitars, has a guitar owned by Prince, which
Really?
I still have issues with. But he's phenomenal, as in, absolutely, transformative. And I think that's been one of the real sort of catalysts. But in addition to that, I would say some of the team have been working on particular problems or challenges for quite some time. And there's, one particular engine that, we won't talk about in the public space yet, which one person's been just absolutely knocking away at for 18 months, maybe more.
Yeah, I'd say probably more, about 2 years. And again, it is, to Nick's point, like 2 years worth of grinding without getting anything. And then ultimately, when it delivered, it really delivered. And again, without diving into the details, but you need people who have that stamina, the energy to be able to do this for 2 years straight, and then knowing like, okay, there is something at the end.
And I would say that the success in the commercial engagements recently have really been derived from that engine. And I think the other inflection point is that the engines have got to that level of maturity now, where we are really unlocking value and unlocking sort of novel patents for people, sort of biomarker discovery, etc. And because we can do it in a very transparent way, it's a really nice meeting, because it's like, hey, this is what we think is going on. This is our working out. We're happy to talk about the bits in the middle, but what do you think? There's no, it's come up with something, and now it's a black box.
Do you think not having worked in industry before is a good thing? Particularly you as a clinician. Do you think that's actually helped you? Because you think of things...
I think I've always had a slightly... So my background, so I learned to code it when I was 10. Etc. So I wrote and sold software when I was 14 or 15. Wow. So I think I've always had a slightly weird background, and I think I did medicine in Liverpool, then PhD at Cambridge and postdoc at NIH. But I was involved in lobbying of Congress, non-profit, just to say, and then also involved in some lobbying with politicians here. Managed to get the law changed along with the Motor Neuron Disease Association in the UK.
What was the law?
I won't go into the details, but if you look up the Motor Neuron Disease Association, who's a phenomenal charity that I used to sit on their board as a trustee, there's a lot of campaigning that people living with the disease did, and we managed to get something changed. There's a cartoon of me on the internet somewhere, which is me looking very clinical.
Do you have long hair in that?
No, I didn't have long hair at that point. So I don't think. So I don't think it's about not working in the industry. I think it's about just shifts in perspective. And accumulating, I don't know what it is. It's accumulating, it's seeing pain from different points, I'd say.
I was going to say with anger, but it's not necessarily.
It isn't anger,
It's the frustration that grows on you when you're not able to make the change from where you are currently sat. And that change leads to like the drive that you need to go and deliver on the commercial side of things.
One of the things I've heard since tech bio has become a big thing. Right? One of the things I've heard, which was summed up beautifully as a quote, which I've coined it now. I have a joke about when we talk, but it was that quite often with tech bio, it's an uppercase T and a lowercase b.
Yeah.
And I wondered what your thoughts were around that and how you protect and mitigate against that.
Good question.
Yeah, look, we completely agree. I think there's a lot of things where your tech is built, but it doesn't solve the pain point. I think that's where, Mo and I have got a very different approach.
So things are done in BioCortex out of necessity. There are no pet projects in BioCortex, I can tell you that. Things are done for a reason, and the reason is driven by science. Either a clinical need or a scientific need that is articulated, and that is acted upon. And so to your point about great tech, lowercase b, that is not the case there, because it all starts from science. Like we start with the hypothesis, and then after that translates into requirements, and then goes into the tech, build, validate it, etc., etc.
And I think we had revenue before we had any institutional investment. And so we've always sort of tried to maintain that, and I think that really means that you don't end up doing a science project, as in this isn't a vanity thing about we want the largest model trained on the largest data set to X, Y, and Z. This is the pain point. What tools do we need to solve that pain point? Well, this is the tool that we need. So let's go build it.
And that pragmatic thinking is sometimes completely. The feedback I get is that doesn't always come out of academia straight away. The commercial sensibilities that go towards outcome focused.
Yeah, I think it is. I think for me, it's that clinical sort of decision making about making decisions where you don't have all the information, as Mo said, and just being fairly sort of not sort of ruthless about it, but ruthlessly driven about unlocking the value. And yeah, I would say.
Yeah.
And if you take your mind back to your time as a clinician, what was the moment, if there was one, when you were a clinician, when you thought, I need to solve this problem?
I think it's, my area of expertise as a clinician is ALS, or motor neuron disease. It's a disease that has the prognosis isn't great if you look at a group. At an individual level, you really can't tell. But if you look at a group, it isn't very good. For me, looking after people living with motor neuron disease is a real honor. And I think for me, when people would come and see me every 3 months, and okay, so you were working on that last time, Nik. It's been 3 months. What's changed? It's like, well, I submitted the grant now. It's like, well, great. When are you going to hear? 9 months, 12 months, maybe. And then it's going to take another 6 months to set it up. And then it's going to take another 2 years for it to run, or 3 years. It's a very different pace. And I think I think to me, one of the things when we were first working on some of the underlying infrastructure for BioCortex, my lab at the ION, there was one moment where we were able to reproduce work that took the lab something like 18 months to do in about 4 minutes. We could do it in seconds now. And it's just like, well, we can just move at a much faster pace.
And Mo, when did you realise that life sciences or pharma lacked the discipline that you would bring to it within engineering?
I'd say that dinner, actually. I'd say the dinner where we sat next to each other. I remember that very distinctively, because I was completely oblivious, just to say. I'm probably, as an engineering background, like heavy in maths, etc. I was the farthest possible that I could have been from like biology and the whole medicine space. And so just realizing the situation of like how it is by having a short conversation with Nik, and also realizing that you could make a difference. It's honestly, it started from there. Like we just didn't stop talking since that dinner.
It's amazing, really, isn't it, when you think about it?
It's a long time ago.
It's a lovely story.
Yeah, it is a long time. It's potentially 10 years. We don't quite know yet.
Probably, yeah. I can't believe we've known each
other. It's only 9 years.
Yeah, I'd go with
parents to
I'd
each
go
other's
more with
children. On a personal level, when you have those difficult periods as co-founders, because one of the things that's really exciting about your story is it is an early stage company coming out of its kind of roots. So when you have those moments, what keeps you going?
I can go first and say it's the opposite of whatever is a bullshit job is, right? Like what we are doing, I do believe can make a difference, and knowing, and I mean it, like actually knowing that this could make a difference means a lot, because that keeps you going. Because there were times in previous hats where you just think this is like a bullshit job. What am I doing here? Like that is killing. Knowing that this could make a difference is definitely.
And what value will you never compromise on? Whether it be clients, employees?
I think if you look at it, I think transparency is across everything, because it's trust. Fundamentally, you have to build trust with the team, with our clients, and that comes down to transparency. Of the no bullshit rule is really important to us, but it's the saying that you don't know something. It's like, look, we can't do this. I do spend time actually telling companies, we can't help you on this, and like, surely you can try in this. And it's like, it's not our bag. And it's actually not bullshitting and not saying, well, look, we'll put it into the model and it'll spit out something.
When you spotlight BioCortex, where are you in terms of commercialized revenues versus investment and that kind of thing?
Yeah, we had a great last quarter. And I would say, I always get very nervous about this, and I'm not saying I should say this on a podcast, but our burn is very, very modest, and our revenue is doing well. And you can put the two numbers together, and hopefully one will be bigger than the other quite soon.
We are close to that point, which is a very important point, where you are cash flow positive, basically.
Yeah, so Mo can say that. I just get nervous about saying this.
the angels of
Exactly.
demons or
Somebody's
whatever.
going to crap all over it.
And when you look at an investor, one thing that stood out actually is you've got people like Ed Clifford, who was on the podcast. So he is someone that comes across as very tech savvy when you look at life science investors. And you also have other investors that are very tech focused. I'd love to hear some thoughts around that and how they complement each other and complement you as a business.
Yeah, so our seed round was led by Ed, so Softnova Partners, and also Hussein at Hoxton. Hussein's got a very deep tech background. He's as geeky as us, I would say, on a number of things. Yeah. Not afraid to get his soldering iron out, which is always a good sign.
I've never heard that as a benchmark. That's a new one.
It is, as in everybody's... I don't know if everybody's got a soldering iron. I know I was trying to fix something the other day with my
dad
soldering
had one
iron.
when I was going out.
It's a good test.
It is a good test.
He's an engineer, to be fair, so that makes sense.
And we've had, and it's great to have Draper Associates on board. I think
Draper Associates have had a number of enormous tech wins.
Yeah, absolutely.
From like SpaceX and people like that.
Absolutely. Yes. They're phenomenal. Tim is great. So Michelle and Andy are, they're a phenomenal team. They're very small, but they are, high conviction, high impact thing. I think for us, what we look for in an investor is recognition that we are weird, right? And it's like, it's acceptance of it, but it's actually really accepting it as opposed to sort of collecting something weird that you look at in your portfolio.
It goes step further. It's a celebration of the fact that you're weird, because you don't want somebody shy away from saying, describing us in anything other than they're weird, right? Is actually, I'd say, wrong, because you want somebody to embrace that weird.
To be different.
Yeah, because otherwise you have a tension between, we're going to try and squeeze you into a box. Yeah, and there are different boxes we could be squeezed into.
So in a corporate way, you would just say, we're disruptive. We're doing something new and different.
Yeah, very high value. As in, if you look at the amount of value about moving assets from China to global, essentially that business model that potentially includes royalties, etc. But also, at a certain stage, there's no reason why, if we're not backing winners, we can in-license ourselves and actually sort of flip the asset like a Roivant type model. So the upside there is huge without the pipeline risk. In addition, we work in health, but also in consumer health, which also de-risks us as well. And the tech is completely the same across all of it. So there's the upside without the downside, I would say. Yeah,
and it kind of reflects the nature of the markets at the moment, doesn't it, in life sciences? We're seeing rapid innovation in China.
Yeah.
Whereas before, you would look at drug development and the reputation was that it wasn't as a premium level, if you like, as Europe or West. Yeah. Whereas now I'm not hearing that at all. Yeah. It's quite the opposite. And we are also seeing a trend in European companies kind of moving to the US or to China a little bit earlier than was previous. You'd often see it to phase 1, phase 2, whereas now I'm seeing them move over there preclinical, really. Which is so much sad, because you've got some great talent in Europe, right? So,
agreed.
Especially in the UK.
No, sure.
So we're wrapping up the end of it now. If any of the listeners want to get hold of you, what's the best means for them to do that?
LinkedIn.
Yeah, so LinkedIn, or just ping us an email.
On our website, there is an email. You please
just
reach
ping
out.
us. Yeah, always happy to chat to people.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure.
Oh, thank you for having us.
Yeah, no, thank you so much.